Friday morning. President Trump sat down with Marc Caputo of Axios at the White House yesterday for his first interview since signing the agreement that extends the ceasefire with Iran. Here's part of that conversation.
What have you learned about not just the exercise of power, but the limits on your power as a result of the conflict?
There are no limits.
No limit.
No, I haven't learned that lesson yet. I know there are, but, there are no limits. We defeated them totally militarily. Who else could have done a blockade like that? I did a naval blockade where not one ship was able to get through. Some tried. They didn't, it didn't last very long.
And it certainly brought Iran to the table more than before. However, beginning a conflict, you had talked about you only wanted unconditional surrender. And the MOU doesn't look like unconditional surrender.
Well, it really probably is unconditional surrender.
And White House reporter for Axios, Marc Caputo himself, joins us now. Marc, good morning. So take us inside that conversation with the president. There's a lot, even just in that one clip we played there. This is not unconditional surrender for Iran, obviously, but what stood out to you?
What stood out for me is the guy didn't really sleep. The president hadn't slept much. I think maybe 2 hours. He had flown back from Europe. But his general attitude was very positive, despite all of the negative commentary and pushback over the deal. The president seems pretty relieved because he has an exit here. And he's looking at two things. He's looking at the stock market, and he's looking at the price of oil. And the price of oil is down, and at one point in the interview, he said it, or a few points in the interview, he said that. At one point, he said, it's a gusher, as if he literally struck oil through this deal because of the price, lowering. And that really impressed me because it just shows what Trump is really focused on. Yeah.
Marc, you talked also about, a whole range of things. You had half an hour, I think, with the president. You spoke about regime change. You also spoke about his relationship with Netanyahu. We heard J.D. Vance earlier being very critical of the Israeli government, surprisingly so for an American vice president. How was the president when you asked him about his relationship at the moment with Netanyahu?
I specifically asked him that, and he said, Bibi, we're good. He said, but we've got to keep him, and he sort of paused for a second, sane. And I said, well, how do you control Israel from attacking Lebanon and possibly sort of starting to wreck the ceasefire of this deal? And he says they're going to do what I say, and they listen to me. And it was just a very kind of clear statement from Trump that he thinks he has so much influence over there because of not just his relationship with Netanyahu, but also I think Israel's standing in the world, as Vance indicated, that he has this sort of ability. Now, whether or not Netanyahu is going to go along with it, who knows? We reported a little while ago at Axios that very hot phone call that Trump had with Netanyahu, and Netanyahu attacked Lebanon at a certain point, and the Iranians started to pull out of negotiations and caused all the sturm and drang. So it's less of a close relationship now than it was heading into the war.
He spent the last few days in Europe as the details of the MOU started to come out. And we report on the program the number of Republican senators, Cassidy, Cotton, Wicker, who have now come out pretty critical about the deal. Do you think, and you say that the president sounded genuinely positive about what he had achieved, do you think now that he comes back and he turns on Fox News and he's sitting in the residence and he's watching television and he sees the criticism even coming from Fox News, that that's going to change his mind about this deal, or that it's going to make it harder for him to defend it? Woe
betide him who predicts what Donald Trump is going to do. Nevertheless, I would find it difficult to believe that he would change that much. My general view of Trump is that if you criticize something that he has started to put his chips in, he doesn't like the criticism. I asked him during the interview, are you going to punish any of the Republicans who oppose you on this? Because there are elements of the deal with sanctions that are going to need to come back to Congress for sort of a final approval, in part to set up or make effective this $300 billion reconstruction fund. And it took me a little while to get the president to answer, but he said basically no. Now, I'm wondering if that'll change. That is, if the criticism reaches a fever pitch from his own party, does he start to really push back and start to target people? I don't know that.
So, Mark, congrats on the interview. Obviously, it's yet another example of President Trump trying to assert his own reality, right? Living in denial, I'd argue, about some of the outcomes here in Iran. But he can read the polls, and certainly other members of the Republican Party can, and they see how unpopular this war was and currently how unpopular he and the GOP is. So, is there any recognition, not from Trump himself personally, but aides you've talked to, just about what a bind they're in? Is there any sort of concern as to what this meant for November?
If you scratch a few layers beneath the surface, yeah, you'll hear that, but there certainly is going to be nothing on the record or even on background. But you can tell that what was just really concerning them is not just the poll numbers, but what was causing the underlying poll number troubles, and that was the price of gas. And my guess here, having talked to them over the past few months about the war, is that the argument they're going to make is, look, everyone was complaining about gas prices. Well, gas prices are coming back down, and therefore what the president is proposing is a good idea. And that might be a challenging argument for his opponents and his critics to push back on. Just realize the American people don't really pay a lot of attention to the finer points of foreign policy and these various points of the MOU. They're focused on their lives, and they're driving around, and every day there's been a scoreboard on street corners that people have seen, and that's the price of fuel. Even if you drive a Tesla, you at least can see what the price of fuel is doing, and it's been up, and people don't like it. And now it's going to come down, and the president's hope is as a result of that coming down, the fortunes of Republicans increase. That is, if they take yes for an answer, his version of yes, and embrace this deal.
One of the many extraordinary moments in this interview, when you ask about regime change, you say, how is this regime change? And the president says, well, they are different people. Khamenei Jr. is different from the father, which I guess technically is true, but probably not the definition of regime change. You can see the full interview online for Axios. White House reporter for Axios, Marc Caputo. Thanks so much for bringing it to us. We appreciate it.